Hi, my name is Wren Carroll, and I am a speech-language pathologist contracting into the Columbus County school system. And I have a master's degree from East Carolina University in Communication Sciences and Disorders, and have been working in the school setting for about 10 years now.
Awesome. Okay, so one of my questions that I have for you is to describe your caseload, like students that you're working with currently.
Okay. I serve multiple schools. So one of the schools that I serve does not have a self-contained classroom. So all of the students are in the general education setting. Okay. And I serve about 45 students at that school. At my other school, there's about 35 on caseload, and about 8 of those students are in a self-contained classroom.
So when you go to those schools, you pull them out and just work with them individually?
Both. Sometimes they are seen in their classroom setting, and sometimes for articulation and maybe some other areas that are hard to work with in the classroom with a lot going on, we pull out for. Okay. So it's both.
So what are the typical ages that you work with?
At the school that does not have the self-contained classroom, it's all school age. So I see students from kindergarten up through 6th grade. I actually don't have any 7th graders. Okay. And at the other school, there are 2 pre-K classrooms, 2 NC pre-K classrooms. Okay. So some of those students, if they have IEPs, can be as young as 3. And then I do serve children at the middle school there, again, I think up to probably like 13 or 14.
Okay, so what are some of the things that you do to work with them on certain things, like activities that you do with them?
Students that are articulation, so those are the ones that are having trouble with their sound productions. We do a lot of drills, a lot of modeling. It follows a hierarchy of first, can they produce the sound? Then can they produce the sound in a word? Can they put it in a phrase? Can they then put it in a sentence and up to conversation? So depending on where the students are, honestly, with articulation, we play a lot of games. It's very easy to work articulation into games like bingo, Candyland. Before they get a turn, they have to make a certain number of correct productions. So with articulation, we do a lot of that, just a lot of pronouncing the sound. With language, it depends on the student and the level. We play some games that are targeted for language. If they're pulled out, if they're in the classroom, if the student is very low functioning, we might even be working with picture cards. Some of them even have augmentative communication devices. So there is a big range. But a lot of it is for the kids that can come and participate fully. They have a lot of fun. We do a lot of fun things, and I don't do a lot of worksheets. We do a lot of interactive, engaging activities.
I'm sure it'd be hard to do that with worksheets.
It is. Now there are, I do have some older kids, where we work on things like reading a passage and responding, not just to who, what, when, where, but prediction, inferencing, drawing conclusions, creating what should the title of this paragraph be. It is hard to get away from not reading the text with some of those, but then I have a lot of other games and activities that you pick a card and you read and you have to predict based on that card rather than doing a worksheet. And yes, the younger kids, no way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the kids that are in just the general ed classroom, does their speech impairments affect them at all in that situation that you've seen? Sometimes.
And I will say, to me, that's a little bit of a $1 million question. A lot of teachers want to know, so do I count it against them when they're doing like dibbles and they're doing phonics assessments and that kind of thing? To me, a teacher can tell, especially if they've been a part of the IEP team, which they should be. Yeah. They should know what sounds the child has difficulty with. If a child is reading the word with and they're consistently saying with, and he walked on the path and he's doing that F for TH, then I think the teacher could know not to count that against the child. There's different levels of articulation disabilities or delays. There are certainly students that have such a significant articulation delay, it does impact their ability to effectively communicate with their teachers and with their peers. And we really do also look at the social aspects. Is this child going to be less likely to raise his or her hand to speak in class? Is this child going to be comfortable in front of the class, speaking, presenting? because of their articulation delays. So absolutely. And then as far as language goes, those students might be the ones that are really having difficulty following directions, needed information presented to them multiple times. A child with a vocabulary deficit is going to have a lot of difficulty learning new material because they're really not getting all the words and all the meanings. A child that's having grammatical, syntactic type difficulties when it comes to writing sentences, making sure that their word order, when they're asking questions or writing questions is correct, can certainly, does carry over into the classroom.
Oh, for definitely. Sure. And then what are some examples of things that, students that you have noticed that they might have an articulation disorder or speech disorder? How do you assess that? How do you evaluate and figure out if the child needs help or not?
The way that I have done it, and really the way that it's kind of set out by DPI, is I usually ask teachers to somewhat informally, at the beginning of the year, give me any students' names that they would like for me to come listen to. Articulation is a lot easier for me to come into a classroom, spend a few minutes with a child, and decide if it's worth actually going through the evaluation process. Language is a lot more difficult because a child who is having language difficulties in the classroom is probably very likely also having academic difficulties. And so is that child's language really the basis for their problems, or is it a component in a bigger picture? And so a lot of times the children who are having language difficulties get referred for testing for learning disabilities and other qualification or placement, and ultimately could receive speech language as a related service, but it wouldn't be their primary. It can be, but usually the teachers refer because of the academic difficulties, and then we discover there's a language component that requires the language services. But for articulation, I usually go in and listen. A lot of times the teacher will say, come and listen to this kid. I can't decide. And it's a 5-year-old who says wabbit and ear and, turn on the white, and they're 5. And it's just not something that we, in the school setting, can really write goals for. Those are later developing sounds, and they're just sounds that we believe have a good chance of remediating on their own as they grow and develop. So that's why the informal screening is a better plan than the teacher makes a referral and we hold an IEPT meeting. We're locked in at that point to the full process when the child doesn't have an R and they're 5. So I usually go in first and listen, and if the child has a certain number of error sounds, has a certain level of unintelligibility in their conversation, or has certain sounds that I know they should have acquired by that age, then I will go ahead and invite the parent to a meeting, which is the DEC 1 or the referral meeting, and then the process begins. So then I would get permission to assess, and we do have certain assessments for the articulation, and then there's certain assessments for language screening. If they fail the language screening, we go on and do full language assessment.
There's actually, I'm doing an internship at Riceville Elementary School, and there's a girl in my class who at home, her parents only speak Chinese.
Oh my goodness.
And so that's her first language, and she's in 1st grade, and she's great academically. She's above and beyond everything, but she does have that language struggle. Would she be referred for that?
That is there are courses after courses on piecing out what is a language disorder and what is a language delay or language difference because of English as a second language.
Yeah.
And when we place a child, we have to answer a lot of questions. Like on the state, there's a state database called CCAS, and one of the first things they ask, I cannot move forward in the IEP process unless I answer the question: is the student limited English proficient? And yes or no. And I'm going to pause. I think I'm burning my dinner over here, Carson. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Put this on low. Scrape the bottom.